If a nerd asks you whether you want to see the notebook, you may not be getting what you bargained for. It may be a love affair in every sense of the word, but it's not quite what you'd expect. I've been in love so often in my life. I was in love with my Sinclair ZX Spectrum. I was in love with Turbo C version 2. I was deeply in love with Susie. And I was in love with Venture 16. No, it isn't a ship from King Kong. Admit it. You've never heard of Venture, have you? Of course you haven't. How could you?
This is the most fantastic story I've ever heard.
And every word of it's true, too.
That's the fantastic part of it.
You were probably not even born when she came into my life. But I remember it as if it were yesterday. She was a type-in the 1983 October issue of Computer and Video Games. I had some doubt whether it would work at all, since I didn't have a 16K ZX Spectrum, I owned the 48K model. Yeah, I was still wet behind the ears in those days. But I took a deep breath and entered it anyway. It worked. Of course it worked, no problem. Now, who was the original author of Venture 16? The original article says A. Clapham, but Spectrum Computing lists him as Andrew Clapham. According to his webpage, he wrote another game for Computer and Video Games, published in July 1985, called CVG Rockfall. Sure, I tried googling his name, but anything that popped up had either very little to do with programming, or the timeline or location didn't really match. And that was it. Now, where does Fort come in? I'd written 40H in late 1994, but it took until 1997 until I released it. First of all, it needed more work. Second, and maybe the most important thing, I was getting tired of emailing copies all over the world. And third, it needed proper documentation and some example programs. That's where Venture 16 came in. Venture 16 is a small but proper text adventure. It has a little over 16 rooms and a dozen or so objects. You can solve it within 15 minutes, even if you never saw it before. But it has atmosphere. At the start of the game you find yourself at a road, having shacks at both sides. Automatically you imagine it is dark, and your way is lit by the flickering light of torches. If you go a little further south, you see a huge ivory pyramid arising in the distance. Once inside the pyramid, there are plenty of rooms to keep you busy. Like a treasure room, an embalming room, and a small garden where a large Canadian redwood lives. You get the picture, it's not bad. You'll have fun unraveling the puzzle. But it must be said, as a programming example, it has very little to offer. It's not particularly well structured, so what's there to love? First of all, you have to realize that Venture 16 does the best with what it's got. I mean, ZX Basic is probably not your language of choice if you want to make a structured program. It's virtually impossible to make tables and initialize them in a comprehensive way. In Venture 16, data statements are used, which is not ideal. So the first thing I did when I converted it to 40H was to define proper tables. Like one for objects, one for object attributes, one for locations and their available exits. You get the picture. At that time I hadn't been programming in Fort in a decade, so was pretty eager to get it right. After all, this was my showcase to the world. I used a very vertical style, something I rarely do anymore. I tend to cram as much as I can in an 80-column line nowadays. I mean, keep your procedures as flat and as compact as possible, right? I also took great care of naming the words, and the result is remarkable. You can read it as if it were plain text. If the object is not a dragon or the dagger is missing, you cannot do this. If this dragon is done, you can't do him again. Otherwise, this dragon is done. He is no more. He has ceased to be. Bereft of life. The dragon rests in peace. This is an ex-dragon. It's almost poetry, isn't it? I'm tearing up every time I read it. Sorry. And yeah, the program is still there. Download the package and see for yourself. But that's not the end of Venture 16. The language is long gone, but at one time Arena quickly gained some popularity. It was a C-like scripting language, so it was easy to learn for guys like me. The project owner was a nice guy, and I wrote a few example programs for him. You guessed it, including a version of Venture 16. Yeah, it's still got some of this je ne sais quoi Ford smell to it, don't you think? Now let's fast forward a couple of years, and I've just written a classic basic interpreter in 40H. And how do you give legitimacy to an interpreter, no matter how primitive it is? You port Venture 16 to it. Nowadays, uBasic 4 supports structure basic, like user-defined functions and procedures, but at that time I just managed to add tiny basic compatibility to the language. No strings attached, pun intended. So I decided to make the program menu-driven. Note it's a complete reinvention. It bears no similarity to the original program. Even the binary operations are performed by a long series of arithmetic operations. So, what do you think? Do you think I finally put this thing to bed? Of course not! When I visited Berlin, I saw this strange device at the local exposition. It's like a ZX printer with 4 buttons. It's like a hard copy text adventure. It prints a location description, gives you 4 possible actions, you choose by pushing one of the buttons, and the next description is printed. Simple. I liked it so much I designed the software version myself. In 40H, of course. And as always, when you design a program, you need some examples. The first one was a Jim Morrison adventure. I've been webmaster of the European Doors fan club for years. Long story, rock and roll life, no need to go into this. The second one was a version of, you guessed it, Venture 16. Now the structure of this file is tree-based. There is no way to store stuff into variables. So I had to introduce a few elements in order to cut down the number of branches. I didn't feel like writing the programming equivalent of War and Peace, just to add a silly example. Note it borrows a lot from the menu-driven uBasic 4 version, since this one has no objects to refer to either. But the overall feel of the game is largely preserved, I think. But there was still that itch, There is no uBasic version of Venture 16 that reflects the original ZX Basic program, like the 40H version does. Yeah, I considered adapting the menu-driven version, but it didn't feel right. And then, one day, I got a great idea. Why not convert the original ZX Basic program, verbatim? uBasic 4 had made significant progress. So maybe it was possible now. It still supports Classic Basic, why not? So I tried. Replacing the multi-character variable names was not hard. I simply made an inventory of the variables used and replaced those affected with single character names. I also sacrificed an element per array to retain the one indexed array offsets. It was just easier that way. Also, I had to reverse the elements of the dot-terminated array, since the values were now loaded from the stack instead of a data statement. I also had to add the odd unloop statement to some badly constructed for next loops. Of course, the ZX Basic ORs and ANDs were replaced with additions and multiplications. And there were plenty other minor conversions and adaptations. All in all, I don't think it was too bad. It went pretty smooth, I guess. I thought it was a fun idea to take it a step further and add all the display gimmicks the original had featured, like flashing and coloring. All I had to do was to add the equivalent NZ escape sequences, which are supported out of the box by uBasic 4. And this is the result. What had started as a template for a Ford example program almost 30 years ago had now been converted to a basic interpreter that had spawned from the same roots. Venture 16 had come home. Full circle. And ending on that positive note, I'm Hans Bezemer and this was Back and Forth.